Fred, you were a real proponent. You were really excited about the potential cost savings, et cetera. Give us a bit of a litany on what are the benefits of nuclear, and then maybe if you can play the devil's advocate role and say the downsides.
It is a safe and reliable, first of all. It's an energy source. It's way safer than, for instance, coal and oil because it doesn't produce any carbons in the atmosphere. In the history of nuclear energy in America, there's never been one fatality. It is a proven safe energy source. There is a storage problem, but that can be mitigated and solved if we allow America to catch up with France and other nations that are doing it safely. Environmentally, it's clean, it's 100% renewable. We'll never get enough energy in Hawaii, reliable energy that can be turned on and off at whim from wind, solar, and the other green renewables. So we need a diversified portfolio. I support wind and solar, but nuclear is much more cost effective and much more reliable. It's affordable. The cost for a kilowatt hour, which we're paying 22 cents on an average statewide right now, the highest electrical rates in the nation by far, sometimes double the national average. Nuclear energy would put us at about 10 to 12 cents a kilowatt hour. We can break up the grid and have small independent sources of energy, so we're not totally reliant, so we don't have island-wide breakouts. There's new technology that's much more affordable and much more independent, so we break up the grid and we don't have to rely on one source for energy. It allows the state of Hawaii to be energy independent. We don't have to rely on foreign sources, most especially Mideast oil or coal from Indonesia or some other third world country. There's enough reliable energy 24/7 that during low peak demand times we can use electricity to energize electric cars. Electric cars are going to happen. It's just a matter of when. Are we going to wait to 2030 to have them, or are we going to wait till 2015? We can retool the whole automotive industry. Excess capacity could also be utilized in dry areas to desalinate water. We could make the island of, for instance, Kaho'olawe, very green with just one desalination. A small modular reactor, which is the braking technology, could provide that energy. So the benefits are just overwhelming, and there's no proven, problem with utilizing it because it's being successfully utilized around the world. And the real hypocrisy, and I pointed this out to Jay, and I once again pointed out to your audience, we already have nuclear energy in Hawaii. We already have what are called small modular reactors. We got, at any given time, 8, 10, 12 or more nuclear reactors in Hawaii operating successfully for over 40 years, and they're called nuclear submarines. So why don't we use them to benefit the people of Hawaii? And I know there's going to be a explosion, excuse the play on words, of opposition to this, but we must do what's best for the longest time and not allow the naysayers and doomsdayers to thwart progressive thinking.
We're going to hear a small part of that explosion with, can you match?
Your last point is very good. The fact is we already have nuclear reactors and maybe nuclear weapons here in Oahu. And so is there really a difference if we put a reactor for peaceful purposes, an energy reactor? I don't think it's much of a difference. But on the other hand, the people will, and I believe to some extent legitimately argue that there's a problem with dealing with the waste. We talked that in the first half hour. And there's also a problem in dealing with the safety. And the safety is a very emotional issue. Evacuating this island in the case of a nuclear mistake would be very troublesome and costly. Imagine evacuating 1 million people. And what would happen to our society if we did that?
In fact, Jay, let me, because that really brings back a memory of when we had, and I believe, Senator, you were there, in 2008 we had a hearing on this very issue, and we had Alan Lloyd and a few other experts come in. And the poison pill came up when the evacuation plan was outlined by some federal designation that when you evacuated the islands in the distances that were required for nuclear safety, basically everybody had to go out to sea. Hawaii literally had to go in boats to get out, and they said, hey, this doesn't work. It was kind of a poison pill. Do you remember that? And
yeah, I do, but that was based on old technology. What's happening now, and I was in Washington, D.C., and actually I drafted some legislation for consideration by Senator Joe Lieberman and some other leaders in this field nationally. What's happening is something called small modular reactors, and they're very small. Right now, It takes 10 years to get a license to operate a reactor, and reactors are the big ones like you see throughout the nation. There's one at the surfing spot in San Onofre, California. Those produce 1,000 or more megawatts of electricity. Small modular reactors being produced by companies or being developed by companies like Hyperion and Toshiba will produce between 10 and 200 megawatts of electricity. So they're very small. But what's really great about them is they're easy to sequester and put underground to protect them for security reasons, and they don't melt down. The new technology is infinitely safer than the old technology. So science and technology will eventually, I believe, overcome the safety concerns, even with storage. You mentioned storage, and it is a problem. You know, people don't want to have a mountain of nuclear waste that's going to last 1,000 years or more sitting in a mountain somewhere. Well, first of all, in France, they recycle 90% of their waste, and secondly, they're technologically, once the economies are scaled there, they will develop a way to neutralize the waste, and people are talking about that already. So basically, you won't have any, you know, nuclear energy storage problems.
Fred, what are we doing with our submarine waste? You know, we mentioned 10 to
The
15
Navy
submarines. Well, what does the Navy do?
The Navy
Do we
handles
know
it.
that?
I don't know what they do with their waste, but the Navy has successfully operated submarines. As you well know, the Nautilus back in the 50s. We've had nuclear energy in the Hawaiian Islands, in spite of our Constitution, for well over 50 years. And it's been very safe. And like I say, these small modular reactors are infinitely more safer. Technology's changed, Gene. And there was a time 30 or 40 years ago when these nuclear reactors engendered a lot of fear, but they have a track history of safety, they have a track history of reliability, and most importantly, I'm being told by most people that the real big problem right now in the world is carbon emissions. And these absolutely zero carbon emissions, and they can also be the fuel that takes us away from the internal combustion engine. We can all be driving electric cars. I drive a hybrid right now.
There's two sea changes I want to mention. Okay, first sea change is that people still live in 1945 and what happened in Japan. I mean, those are an indelible impression on the lives of everybody on this planet. And then, of course, we went through the Cold War, when the nuclear threat was there on a daily basis.
Mutually assured destruction. Mad.
I mean, and people see nuclear as a weapon. They see it as the most powerful weapon ever devised, a weapon so powerful they can't really even understand it. And it's a huge threat to most people on the planet. There's an emotional baggage with that.
Exactly.
It's a mile wide. It's not just an environmentalist kind of issue. It's an issue for anyone who has that fear. It's abject fear that the same thing could happen. And it's not only the fear of an explosion, but it's the fear of cancer, you know, of being exposed to the wrong kind of radiation. There was an article in the paper recently about how ordinary medical radiation can give you cancer, which was not recent.
Yeah, the MRIs.
Recent, right, the MRI.
Spooky.
Article, yeah.
But that,
so my point, though, is that in order to make this happen, we have to diffuse that fear. Because the fear is not completely rational, and we have to get by that. We have to see it as science. And in that way, we can use this greatest power ever devised by mankind for the proper, useful, peaceful
use.
purposes. The other sea change, if I may.
Yes.
The other sea change is technology in general, which is, you know, my orientation on this discussion. You realize, to put it in perspective, I spoke before in our last half hour about my own experience with Apple. That was the year 1979, and Apple was only starting up. It was very primitive. You remember those funny-looking apples? It was very primitive, and the computer was still a whole new idea. We hadn't gotten into the modern age of information technology at all. Okay, that was the year of 3 Mile Island. So how advanced actually could nuclear power be in 1979? Not nearly as advanced as it is today. We've had the benefit of 30 years, count them, of information technology to design, to plan. We've had material science. We've had all these advances that are relevant to the making of nuclear, you know, facilities. And 30 years later, we have much better technology to make much safer, more effective, more efficient nuclear reactors and other devices. That's the other sea change I wanted to mention. People don't realize that the nuclear reactor in 1979 and the nuclear technology today
Small
is
modular.
really, really different.